is December 4th, 2024, and the battle lines are being drawn in Syria once again, as if the conflict never ended there, because it really never did. You've got Russia and Iran notably putting their support behind the Syrian government, as they have for years now. And then on the other side, you have the US, the West as a whole, I guess you could say, and notably Turkey, right? Their support for the extremist forces there in the region, their support for the illegal occupation of Syria from a number of different sources, it has never really ended. It has just become a frozen conflict over at least the last 4 years when it comes to the deal that was in place between Russia and Turkey. But now all of that has been thrown to the wayside. We are seeing renewed fighting. And as you have Russia and Iran putting their support behind Syria in its targeting of this latest offensive by Islamist extremists, specifically targeting the northwestern city of Aleppo, as you have all that happening, you have the US coming in, and guess who it's targeting? It's not targeting the groups who it labels as terrorist organizations. Oh no, it's targeting the other militias and really militaries that it views as Iran-backed. Because it seems as though everyone in the West, and we'll throw Turkey in there as well, maybe NATO as a whole, they are using the current chaos to continue to target the Syrian government and to, as the Biden administration has admitted, continue to target Russia and Iran, because that is the bigger picture at the end of the day. We got into all of the latest happening on the ground with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is international relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Rachel, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always good to have you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here as we have ongoing attacks by extremists targeting Syria, including groups that the U.S. classifies as terrorist itself. And the U.S. is getting involved by carrying out strikes against what it describes as Iranian-backed militias in Syria. So not exactly helping the cause, but all the while, the Western media is acting like Russia is about to abandon Syria, because some reports are saying that Russia may be evacuating some naval vessels because its naval base could be under attack also by these extremists. Also interesting. Now, we know that Russian President Putin has been busy this week talking to almost everyone, including Turkish President Erdogan, which I would love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. I know that's a lot to unpack there, but how do you see the current situation in Syria and kind of Russia's position in helping its ally?
Okay, the situation in Syria can best be summed up as it's a bit of a cluster F, right? Major balls were dropped certainly by the Syrian intelligence, the Syrian military, but also, of course, by Russian intelligence and military, who are also on the ground there, even if the footprint is much smaller than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago, and other forces that are on the ground there. The shock of this surprise offensive, it really shouldn't have been a surprise. I'll say that. There are Syrian analysts out there who have been screaming about this for about a month or two now. This is about to kick off. So if they knew it, then what is the Syrian military's problem? There are some reports now that the jihadis involved, right, we'll collectively call them Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, because that's the largest faction that that controlled the territory, the frozen conflict that they had in northern Idlib. But there are dozens, of other of the 31 flavors of jihad that coexist with them under their aegis on that territory, like the Turkestan Islamic Party and others. That's just some of the most infamous. While that is a discrete force in northern Idlib, right? And they have Turkish support. right? There's no question that the arms they get, the supplies they get, come from the Turkish government. But there's a degree of, however, real it is or not, that it's not open direct support. It's more like open covert support, right?
Mhm.
So they don't admit to it, at least. Now, the rest of northern Syria is that, about a 30-kilometer strip across the border is controlled by Turkey, right? The Turkish military directly, with a more direct proxy Islamist jihadi force that they call, I think they're calling it the Syrian National Army now, or
Mhm.
it's their proxy force. And these are all of the remainder of the Islamists and jihad from the original conflict that are now directly on the Turkish payroll. They are also involved to some degree in this attack. But the word is that at least some of those involved actually may have infiltrated Aleppo over the past couple of months, so that when the offensive came, they activated these essentially sleeper cells in Aleppo, and that hastened the chaos and what is essentially the Syrian armies either retreat from, or just individual units just giving up and running away, whatever the situation was. But if you remember the original civil conflict, only half of Aleppo was actually that ever fell under the aegis of the jihadists at the time. And now, as far as we can tell, all of Aleppo is, right, including the citadel of Aleppo, which had never been fallen the original time. So this is all a bit of a shock at how uh, dramatically the Syrian army just folded in this, and it speaks to, at one hand, to the hollowing out of Syria that has continued over the last 5 or 6 years because of Western sanctions on Syria, and because the U.S. government's occupation force in East Syria is still sitting on top of Syria's oil and wheat fields and preventing, the government from economically recovering. And in fact, there's, you could say, it's actually been getting worse over time. The fact that this depresses the economy of Lebanon and Jordan and the entire rest of the region, that's just collateral damage, right, to the US's destabilization. But the entire region economically is suffering because of this. And so that appears to have hollowed out the Syrian military. And evidently, the salaries Syrian military get are, well, a pittance, literally. You might be able to buy a shawarma for it once a month. And also corruption. And there is still a problem with Syrian elites in Damascus, right? That live effectively in a different world of, I mean, every country has its haves and its have-nots, and the have-nots always outnumber the haves. But this, appears to continue being a problem in Syria. So, whatever the combination of these factors, the Syrian military just folded. So it's a really bad situation. Now, President Putin just spoke with Erdogan on the phone. And as you said, you would love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. It has to be said that just last week, 2 days before this all kicked off, Putin also spoke to Erdogan on
Oh.
supposedly completely unrelated economic matters. And there's an open question of whether that this was about to happen was discussed, or whether Erdogan, sprung this on Putin and stabbed him in the back with it, which is, my favorite reading of the situation. Erdogan is nothing if not a cunning but treacherous beast. So he obviously has felt that he has been left out of that there has been no political reconciliation with the Islamists and jihadists that he continues to sponsor, that he thinks that there should be. What he wants is officiation to some degree of Turkey's occupation of northern Syria to be populated completely with Sunni Islamists and jihadists. That he would, while it might be an autonomous region within Syria, that he would still have de facto control over it. He wants that officiated, because right now it's Turkish taxpayers that are paying the salary of the Syrian National Army, of this 100,000 or so jihadis that Turkey keeps camped out in northern Syria, and to a lesser extent as well the 50 or so thousand Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham and other jihadists in Idlib up there as well. And there continues to be millions of Syrian refugees, usually quite often the families of said Sunni Islamists, that are refugees in Turkey and that are a continuing economic and drain and political sore on the country. The one thing that all Turkish political factions agree on is they hate the Syrian refugees and they want them gone, taking jobs, causing crime, taxpayer funding. And so this has been a political problem for Erdogan, and he would like to resettle them all, colonize in this area. And a lot of that area is area that Kurds have been driven out of, and everyone else, and they just want it populated by Sunni Islamists and jihadists and their families that have political loyalty to Erdogan, right? That's what he wants. That's the political settlement that he wants with Assad. And personally, I can see why Assad refuses to meet with him while Erdogan and his pet jihadis are occupying northern Syria for, a decade now. And that continues. But Erdogan obviously felt he was being slighted and ignored, and what he wanted he wasn't getting, and he senses an opportunity, and he sees a closing window because he knows that Russia has the Kiev regime and effectively its NATO patrons on the ropes, and so he sees that, well, I better get this off while Russia is still distracted. So he's launched this thing. The Russian media and government is pretending that Turkey is not involved, right? And that is Turkey's official line, right? We have nothing to do with it, right? Not us, right? The jihadi under my robe, don't pay any attention, right? And they blame the reason that the terrorist group Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, which everyone agrees, including even the U.S., is Al-Qaeda in Syria. That the reason they're attacking is because the Syrian government refused to come to terms with what Erdogan calls the legitimate Syrian opposition, meaning the other Islamists and jihadists that are only allied with Al-Qaeda occasionally and sometimes not. But, they're just different flavors of the same stripe, right? Just one of the other 31 flavors of jihad and extremist Sunni Islamism in there. So Russia and Iran right now are playing this game that they've long played with Turkey, where they're pretending that this isn't mostly Turkey's game. Now, obviously, the U.S. has encouraged this, right? They're probably whispering in Erdogan's ear. And we know that the Kiev regime is openly involved in it. There's a piece on the Kiev Post where they openly talk about they're providing drone trading to Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, and then they admit, oh yeah, Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham is Al-Qaeda, but as long as they're killing Russians, we're happy, right? It's right out there. Also, the United States has been providing air cover for Al-Qaeda. They continue to occupy East Syria, and the Iraqi popular mobilization units, right, which have Iranian support and training, maybe some number of officers. They were instrumental in defeating ISIS in Iraq, right? Even the U.S. admitted that at the time, when the NATO trained Iraqi army just ran and gave up in front of ISIS. But so these popular mobilization units, again, they're Iranian supported Iraqi units. They're pouring across the border, and calling them a militia is kind of understating them. They're effectively an army, right? In fact, they're large numbers of them are actually part of the Iraqi military and discrete forces. They're pouring across the border to us, to stop this, Al-Qaeda ISIS 2.0, the reignition of this conflict. And the US is openly bombing them as they come across the border and claiming that it's out of self-defense. They're going to fight Al-Qaeda, and the US is bombing them. Let's be perfectly clear about what's going on here, right? When I say bombing, strafing runs, A-10s, Reaper drones, and the like. So I mean, this is just vile. This is Jake, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Sullivan is back at it, right? Let's and he's openly being Al-Qaeda's air force here. There's not even any attempt to pretend really otherwise. And at the same time, U.S. backed Kurdish forces, YPG, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, are also attacking Syrian government, taking advantage of the opportunity to seize villages from Syrian government control. So they're attacking at the same time Al-Qaeda is attacking. Never mind, of course, that the Kurds don't exactly get along with Al-Qaeda either. It's just all political opportunism. This frozen three-way Mexican standoff in Syria has now become completely unfrozen, and everything is game at this point. So Russia is trying to rush reinforcements down there. Supposedly they've sent Wagner or a reconstituted Wagner. I'm not even really sure what the exact designation, but also drone operators and air assets, and they've been very active. The Russian Air Force has been incredibly active in bombing. In fact, there's rumors that Jolani, the head of Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, was killed in a Russian airstrike in the last week, unconfirmed, right? But as well, actually, the heavy lifting on this is probably going to have to be on the ground, because Russia is obviously involved heavily in Ukraine, is going to have to be done by Iran. And on top of these popular mobilization units that have Iranian support, Hezbollah, which has Iranian support, is also now sending troops back into the fray right after this supposed ceasefire that Israel is violating only a couple dozen times a day in Lebanon. But also the Iranian government has officially stated that they will provide official Iranian troops if the Syrian government requests them. So that seems a very likely possibility. But it took a long time and a lot of effort to get the jihadis out of their rat nests in Aleppo, in half of Aleppo the first time around. And it could be a long, if they manage to dig themselves in, it could be a long, bloody, hard slog again. And again, it's inconceivable to a lot of people, this game that is played between Russia and Iran on one side and Turkey on the other, that they maintain active economic relationships, unlike the West, which if they have an enemy, they cut all economic relations right away. So they agree to cooperate economically, and trade between Russia and Turkey and between Iran and Turkey is booming, but agree to have geopolitical differences, namely Syria, Libya, Armenia, Azerbaijan, right, and the like. So essentially, what they're doing is giving Erdogan, I think, kind of an exit ramp. They're, instead of acknowledging that he's behind all of this. They're going along with his charade that he's not, giving him room to back down from this. And because they don't want this to blow up into a wider Russian Turkish Iranian Turkish war, which there has been this agreement. They separate the economic and the geopolitical. But the difference is that when Erdogan follows that, he's always been on the offensive with this, on the geopolitical, right? He's always been on the attack. Whereas Russian forces and Iranian forces have been following it passively. I think the problem was agreeing to this frozen conflict deal with Erdogan that left Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham in control of Idlib and left Turkey and its proxies in control of all of northern Syria since 2020. It was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And at any time a frozen conflict, pay attention, to
Right.
Ukraine again, right? That it could be reignited at any time at a moment's notice, whenever the opportunity rises. I think, I agree, avoid a direct war with Turkey, but you have to be absolutely merciless with Erdogan jihadi proxies, right? You can't have a degree. These people, this is not anything that is compatible with the multi-confessional, multi-ethnic Syrian Arab Republic. However flawed, it is still a pillar of a multi-religious, multi-ethnic republic in what is a region of the world where that is very difficult and not very common. And the rest of Syria's minorities and the plenty of Sunnis in Syria that aren't radical Islamists allied with Salafist jihadists, they have to essentially, if the jihadists and Islamists want to live in an Islamist state, then there's the border north to Turkey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stay up there. That is essentially what it has to be. Unfortunately, it looks like Russia and Iran are hoping, the Kremlin is hoping to mop this up and then essentially appease Erdogan again and probably return to a frozen conflict state. I think that's a mistake, and I hope it doesn't roll out that way. Deal with Erdogan, yes, but like with a serpent under your heel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always interesting to me with Erdogan because I feel like he has these dreams of the Ottoman Empire coming back, right? It's going to rise again. And you're like, no, it's not. And you need to come to terms with that sooner rather than later and stop trying to play the middle of the field, because that's what he always tries to do between Russia and NATO and acting like, and it's like, no, this is not how this works, but it will be interesting.
Back when this conflict was originally frozen and his proxies and his forces were actually, some Turks were actually killed as well, originally, and Erdogan came to Moscow. Erdogan was kept waiting in the Kremlin, in a room with lots of pictures of the Russian Empire defeating the Ottoman Empire, and he was made to wait in that room. Last time around, I think he needs a stronger message this time. And it's not just, it has to be said, it's not just supplies and training and support. There's Turkish artillery that are thundering down on Syrian government positions, and Russians as well. And it has to be said, Russians have already died, right, in small numbers, but they're, because the Russian footprint in Syria is relatively small compared to what it was, but they're still there, and Russians have already been killed in this latest jihadi offensive backed by Turkey, and taken advantage of by the United States and fully supported by the Kiev regime in Ukraine. Because if for those who forget, the Kiev regime since 2015 at least has had battalions fighting for it that are ex-ISIS fighters, and this was quite openly discussed in the Western media and in the Daily Beast by Anna Nemtsova, the Sheikh Mansour battalion. Yeah, they've trained with ISIS and now they're fighting for the Kiev regime. So there's a lot of back and forth. They even did a photo op luncheon with the right sector because Nazis
Oh
and
no.
Salafist jihadis, that it's all good, right? For the Kiev regime and for their U.S. patrons, whatever extremists they can get to serve for them as proxies. Kurds that were once leftist, right? Salafist jihadists and neo Nazis. It doesn't make any difference the ideological differences or the extremism, of any of these factions, as long as they're willing to be useful idiots of the United States and proxies. Now, of course, they view that the United States, they're taking advantage of that, but they're the ones who do the dying. It's a mess, and Russia and Syria and Iran took their eye off the ball, and they took their eye off of Erdogan, and this is very much the opening, a reopening of another front, not only against Russia, it must be said, but against Iran as well. And the big tragedy is the long-suffering Syrian people.
Yeah, I know that the Syrian people have already been through just so much over, well, it's been more than a decade now of the West trying to come in and overthrow their government. And like you were saying, the West specifically targets those. And I know that the Obama administration at the time branded them as moderate rebels and insisted that, oh, yeah, they have nothing to do with this, rising ISIS that is getting all of these weapons out of nowhere and soaring to power. Now, while I have you on, I do want to ask you about the situation in Ukraine because I know that you have obviously Russia now dealing with helping their ally. Ukraine, as you were saying, is apparently more involved in Syria than we would have thought when it comes to their help for these extremists. As all of that is happening, you have the current situation in Ukraine where it's clearly not going well for Kiev. And I say that because you have Newsweek in their regular Institute for the Study of War fueled update admitting that the situation is grim for Kiev. And it's
The
like this.
Institute for who?
your favorite, hold on, let me see if I can get the name right. It's the Institute for the no, it's the Newland Kagan Institute for the Dissemination of War Propaganda. That is the Mark Sleboda branded version of it. So they're saying that the situation is grim in the Donbass. Then you have other Western media saying that the situation is very grim in Kursk, and that the troops from Kiev that are there are literally going, why are we here? We're being told that we're supposed to fight for Ukrainian territory and we're in Russia. This makes no sense. So what is the latest there, and just how grim is it for Kiev?
Yeah, it's bad. The southern Donbass Russian forces there. It's well beyond an operational crisis for the Kiev regime, bordering on an operational collapse. They're Karahova is ending. The battle for Karahova is ending as we speak. Right, it's really just the mopping up at this point, and that really essentially leaves Pokrovsk. Right, I mean, there's a few other settlements, but in very short time, the siege of Pokrovsk, the encirclement of it, is going to begin in earnest. The battles for Chasiv Yar and Toretsk, the Kiev regime has fought very hard and long, and they've had effectively, slowed Russian advance there down. For months and months, it was fought over, but that is also essentially ending at this point. And the Kursk incursion zone continues to shrink. This incredible BBC article where they actually talk to Kiev regime troops on the ground, apparently uncensored, escaping the usual situation with some degree of anonymity, at least. It's grim. They say, we have no hope, no opportunity. We can't even slow them down. We can't hold on. We don't even know why we're holding on. We shouldn't even be here. And then, it was hilarious. The subject of this icy North Korean soldiers fan fiction, this propaganda point that is entirely manufactured and intended to serve as justification for giving the Kiev regime more of its demands. He got the long range attacks with the U.S. and U.K. conducting ballistic and cruise missile strikes into Russia, and the official excuse used was because of these fictional North Korean soldiers that are involved in the conflict. And there are North Koreans in Russia, but they're nowhere near Kursk, right? They're not fighting in the conflict. They're doing training, they're doing all of the interoperability exercises that will have to be done for years until the two forces can actually operate alongside each other. There might be a few observers, combat engineers in the rear watching, learning what the Russians are doing. This is very valuable military experience, but they're not involved in this conflict. And the BBC asks the Ukrainian soldiers about, how's the fight going against the North Koreans? And they're like, what North Koreans? We haven't seen any, we haven't seen any, we haven't fought any, we haven't heard any. And then the final comment was, there was a discussion that they had been offering rewards if they capture any North Korean soldiers, with their documents or whatever. And the one Ukrainian soldier quoted by the BBC, he says that it can be very difficult to find a North Korean in the dark forests of Kursk, particularly if they're not there. Mm-hmm. And, that was, I think, just the final admission that we need. We've long considered that there seems to be no reality to this. Even Michael Kaufman, seen as and commenting on his blog, his podcast, War on the Rocks, we haven't seen any evidence of this, right? And so even the analysts, of the West that are unabashedly, pro-U.S., pro-Kiev, they admit there's no evidence, there's no reality to this whatsoever. It is entirely a propaganda created fiction meant to, justify increased escalation and support for the Kiev regime.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that we've gotten to this point, and yet I look at the Biden administration and I go, oh, they still have a few weeks left, right? We could still escalate even further on the road.
The British Daily Mail has a photo up in the last 24 that it purports to be 2 North Korean female soldiers fighting for Russia. This is a completely Photoshop, AI manipulated picture of 2 young women, former Ukrainians from the Donbass, that are fighting on the Russian side. This was a picture taken years ago. You can see the original. It's obviously been manipulated to make their faces look North Korean. It is just the most atrocious propaganda that is going on. I mean, it's easily debunkable, but all you have to do is create this Red Dawn North Korean scare stories, and the entire Western media completely uncritically goes along with it, and there we are. It almost makes you actually want to see it. If you're gonna lie about it and pretend that it's happening, why not actually just send North Korean soldiers in then and give them what they said they want? But that actually wouldn't be helpful in this situation. Russia does not need the manpower. They have the manpower advantage to a very significant degree. They have volunteer contract soldiers, while the Kiev regime has these mass forced, violently conscripted press gang people that, even according to the Western media, has admitted now, 100,000 or 200,000 of them have deserted.
Wow.
That's, by the way, if it's somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000, that's about the size of the British military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very telling. I'm sure NATO's looking at the situation right now, and I know that, they always bring up the possibility of, getting NATO troops even more involved. And it's like, well, you're getting to that point because Kiev just does not have the manpower.
that the Russian military, that their opinion is bring it, right? As far as they've concerned, the West has been taking pot shots at them, by proxies and the like, and they would love the opportunity to actually engage with NATO troops. And Russia has been very effective. Even the NATO Supreme Commander Europe, the U.S. General Cavioli, has admitted that the Russian military is bigger and better and more experienced than they were by far than at the beginning of this conflict. So if they want to send NATO troops into that hellscape,
Yeah.
best of luck to that.
Yeah, they literally gave Russia nearly 3 years of training time, right? And preparation time. Meanwhile, what is NATO doing? Nothing, none of it. It's mind-boggling, but at the same time, I guess we should be expecting this. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. International relations and security analyst Mark Sleboda, thanks so much for your time and insight.
Thanks for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive deep dive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also catch Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.